My dear friends, I want to begin tonight with a single question, one question so penetrating, so deeply unsettling, that your honest answer to it will determine the entire trajectory of your life. Not next year, not someday. Right now, in this moment, who do you assume yourself to be? Not who you hope to become, not who you are striving toward, not the polished version of yourself you present to the world on your best days, but in the raw, unguarded depths of your consciousness, in that private theater of the mind where no one else is watching. Who do you assume yourself to be? Sit with that question for a moment. Let it breathe. Most people, if they were honest, would confess something uncomfortable. They assume themselves to be victims of their circumstances, prisoners of their histories, slaves to the conditions life has handed them. They believe with the quiet, stubborn conviction of a man who has stopped fighting that their fate is largely out of their hands, that the world acts upon them, that luck, or the lack of it, is the invisible hand steering their ship. But I tell you tonight, with an absolute certainty, born not from arrogance, but from direct experience and profound observation, you are none of these things. You are the operant power of your world, the author of your experience, the God of your own reality, dreaming this life into existence moment by moment through the one faculty most people squander without ever knowing they possess it. You are the assumptive mind, and assumption is everything. The principle I am about to share with you is deceptively simple. So simple, in fact, that the clever intellectual mind will be tempted to dismiss it before it has a chance to transform everything. The intellect craves complexity. It mistrusts simplicity. It wants systems, formulas, equations. And so when I tell you that a single shift in your inner assumption can rewrite the entire manuscript of your life, the educated mind will raise an eyebrow. It will ask for proof. It will demand logic. But logic is the language of the past. And what I am offering you tonight is the architecture of the future. This principle, when properly understood and faithfully applied, does not merely improve your circumstances. It recreates them. It does not add to your life. It transforms it. The results will appear to those who do not understand the law nothing short of miraculous. Let me begin with a story. A young man once came to me in a state of absolute despair. He had lost his job. His relationship had ended. He was staring down the barrel of an eviction notice, counting days he didn't have. When he sat before me, his posture said everything. Shoulders collapsed inward, eyes dull with the particular exhaustion that comes not from physical labor, but from the soul-sapping weight of believing nothing will ever change. He looked at me and said, almost as an apology, "Neville, I'm cursed. Nothing ever works out for me. I'm just unlucky." I stopped him immediately. Not unkindly, but firmly, the way a good doctor stops a patient from insisting on a wrong diagnosis. "My friend," I said, "you have just, in 2 sentences, revealed to me the precise source of every trouble in your life. It is not that you are unlucky. It is that you assume you are unlucky. And assumption, this is everything. Assumption is the foundation of all creation." He blinked. He had expected sympathy, perhaps advice on finding work, perhaps a referral. He had not expected to be confronted with the sovereignty of his own mind. But I pressed on because I knew what was at stake. You see, assumption is not wishful thinking. It is not the cheerful repetition of affirmations while secretly believing none of them. It is not the hollow theater of positive thinking where you smile in the morning and collapse into fear by noon. Assumption is the acceptance of something as true, regardless of all evidence to the contrary. It is the settled bedrock certainty that what you desire already exists, not as a distant possibility, not as a hoped-for future, but as a present reality in the invisible realm of consciousness. Fully formed, fully alive, waiting only to be made manifest in this physical world you call your life. Every state of consciousness carries its own feeling tone, its own inner weather, its own vibrational signature, if you will. When you truly assume the state of being wealthy, not perform it, not pretend it, but assume it at the deepest level, you naturally feel abundant. You feel secure. You feel generous. The anxiety of scarcity simply does not arise because it has no home in the consciousness of a person who knows themselves to be prosperous. When you assume the state of being loved, you feel cherished, appreciated, seen, not needy, not desperate, not auditioning for affection, but genuinely, quietly valued, because that is how loved people feel. When you assume the state of being healthy, you feel vital, energetic, whole, not optimistic about your health, certain of it. In the same matter-of-fact way, a man in peak condition doesn't think about whether his legs will carry him. They simply do. The secret, and here I must ask you to lean forward, because this is the hinge on which everything turns. The secret is that you must feel the reality of your assumption before you see the evidence of it. This reverses everything the world has taught you. The world says, see it first, then believe it. I am telling you, believe it first, assume it first, and then you will see it. Now let me return to that young man. Instead of instructing him to fix his problems, instead of sending him to polish his resume or repair his romantic prospects, I taught him to fix his assumption. I asked him a single question. What kind of person do you want to be? Without hesitation, successful, confident, prosperous. Then that is what you must assume yourself to be, I told him. Not tomorrow, not when your circumstances improve, now. Right now, regardless of what your bank account says, regardless of what your apartment walls reflect back to you. And so he began. Each morning upon waking, in that luminous threshold between sleep and full consciousness, he would close his eyes and feel himself to be the successful, confident, prosperous man he desired to be. Each evening before sleep, he returned to that same inner stage. He imagined walking into his own office, his own mark, that signing important contracts, depositing substantial checks at the bank. He felt the quiet authority of a man who moves through the world knowing he belongs in rooms of consequence. But above all, and this is what made the difference, he cultivated the naturalness of being that person. Not the excitement, not the desperate hope, the calm, settled naturalness. What happened? Within 10 days, a former colleague reached out about a business opportunity. Within 3 weeks, he had secured his first client. Within 2 months, he had moved into a new apartment. Within 4 months, he was running his own consultancy, earning more money than he had ever made in any position he had previously held. Was this luck? Was this coincidence? A fortunate series of unrelated events? Absolutely not. This was the law of assumption in perfect, flawless operation, as reliable as gravity, as impersonal as mathematics, and every bit as real. But let me be precise about something that trips up a great many people, because precision here is everything. When I speak of feeling, I am not speaking of theatrical emotion. I am not asking you to manufacture excitement or perform enthusiasm at yourself in the bathroom mirror. Emotion is a wave, it rises and falls and cannot be sustained. What I am speaking of is something far deeper and far more powerful. I am speaking of conviction, of the quiet, unshakable inner knowing that comes from genuinely accepting something as already accomplished. Think of your own name for a moment. How do you feel about it? You don't get excited that it's yours. You don't cross your fingers hoping it will remain yours. You don't spend 10 minutes each morning visualizing yourself owning it. You simply, naturally, completely assume it to be yours. It requires no effort, no affirmation, no faith in the conventional sense. It is simply known. That is the quality of feeling you must cultivate about your desired state. Not excitement, not hope, not optimistic expectancy, assumption, the deep, quiet, natural sense that of course this is true, of course this is who I am. Let me offer you another story, because stories reach the heart where arguments merely touch the mind. A woman came to me who had been estranged from her son for 5 years. 5 years of silence following a bitter argument, the kind of silence that calcifies into a wall so thick that eventually both parties forget what it felt like to stand on the same side of it. She had tried everything reason could suggest: letters, phone calls, reaching out through other family members, olive branches of every conceivable shape. Nothing had worked. Nothing had even been acknowledged. She was not merely sad, she had begun to believe, to assume, that this separation was permanent, that some doors, once closed, cannot be reopened. I told her to stop trying to make the reconciliation happen. Stop strategizing. Stop reaching outward. Instead, I asked her to go within and assume it had already happened. Every night, before she surrendered to sleep, she was to imagine receiving a loving phone call from her son. She would hear his voice, not angry, not distant, but warm. The voice of a son who had come home to his mother. She would feel the fullness of their reconciliation flooding through her chest. She would assume the feeling of being a mother whose son adored her, the way, perhaps, she had felt when he was small and the world between them was uncomplicated. She persisted in this assumption for 3 weeks. Then, on a Tuesday morning, her telephone rang. Her son's voice, warm, hesitant in the way of someone extending an olive branch and not quite certain how it will be received. He told her he had been thinking about her, that he wanted to rebuild what had been broken between them. And then he told her something that made the hairs stand on the back of her neck. He said he had been dreaming about her for weeks, dreams in which they were happy together, dreams so vivid and so persistent that he had woken each morning with an inexplicable feeling, not quite guilt, not quite longing, but something that combined both, and that finally he simply could not ignore the feeling any longer. He had to call. She had changed her inner assumption, and somewhere in the vast, shared field of consciousness, her son had felt it. I know what some of you are thinking, because I have watched this question form on the faces of every audience I have ever addressed. How is this possible? How can my private assumptions affect another person? How can what I think in my bedroom change what someone else does across the city? Let me give you an answer that will, if you truly receive it, revolutionize your entire understanding of the nature of reality. There is only one consciousness, and you are it. What you call other people are not separate beings existing independently of your awareness. They are projections, aspects of the one infinite consciousness being reflected back to you through the prism of your own assumptions. This is not a metaphor. This is the literal structure of reality as I understand it. When you assume that people love and respect you, you will find, without engineering it or manipulating anyone, that people begin treating you with love and respect. When you assume that opportunities are always opening before you, opportunities will appear where before there seemed to be only closed doors. When you assume that you are healthy and vital, your body, that faithful mirror of your inner world, will begin reflecting that assumption back to you. This is not theory. This is not philosophy. This is law. It operates with the same impersonal, unwavering precision as the law of gravity. You do not need to believe in gravity for it to keep your feet on the ground. And you do not need to fully understand the law of assumption for it to be, right now, in this moment, shaping every aspect of your existence. The only question is whether you are using it deliberately or by default. Let me offer you another story that will make this principle vivid. A businessman came to me wanting to double his income. Not an unusual desire, I have heard it 1,000 times. But when I asked him the question I always ask, his answer was more honest than most. I said, "What would you do if your income were already doubled?" He thought for a long moment. Then, I would buy a new car, move to a better neighborhood, take my family on the kind of holiday we've always talked about and never taken. Then assume you've already done these things, I told him. Feel yourself behind the wheel of that car. Feel yourself walking through your new home at night, turning off the lights before bed. Feel yourself at the airport with your family, watching your children's eyes go wide. He committed to it fully. Every morning, he would spend a few minutes in the vivid inner theater of these scenes. He would visualize signing larger contracts, making more substantial deposits, living at the level his new assumption demanded. But the thread running through all of it, the golden thread that made everything else possible, was the feeling of being a man for whom these things were simply normal. Not exciting, normal. Within 6 months, his income had not doubled, it had tripled. New clients appeared. Investment opportunities materialized from directions he had not anticipated. Windfalls came, the kind that look like coincidence only if you don't understand what's happening beneath the surface. But here I must pause and issue a warning, because there is one thing, one single thing, that destroys the power of assumption for nearly everyone who attempts to work with it. Inconsistency. You cannot assume wealth on Monday and poverty on Tuesday. You cannot claim health in the morning and rehearse symptoms in the afternoon. You cannot feel loved when your mood is good and assume rejection when you feel low. Your assumption must be constant. It must be unwavering, not rigid or straining, but steady, the way a river is steady, always moving in the same direction, regardless of the weather above it. I once knew a woman who desperately wanted to attract her ideal romantic partner. She was sincere in her desire and earnest in her effort. Every morning without fail, she would spend time imagining herself in a beautiful, loving relationship. She would feel cherished, adored, completely fulfilled. She did the work, she was disciplined. She was earnest. And yet, nothing changed. Why? Because every afternoon, when she encountered happy couples on the street, hands intertwined, laughing at something private, a voice in her head would rise up like smoke. That will never be me. I'm not attractive enough. All the good ones are taken. I've left it too late. Can you see what she was doing? She was building with one hand and demolishing with the other, assuming love in the morning and loneliness by noon. Every night's assumption was being cancelled out by every day's habitual thought pattern. She was pouring water into a vessel she had riddled with holes. And so nothing changed, because in the net balance of her inner life, nothing had changed. But here is how she turned it around. And this technique, this specific redirection, will work for you as well. I taught her the art of living from the end. Instead of thinking about her desire, which always implies distance, always implies that what you want is over there and you are over here, she learned to think from her desire. Instead of hoping for love, she assumed she was already loved. Whenever the habitual voice of lack arose, instead of arguing with it or suppressing it, she would ask herself 2 questions. How would I think right now if I were already loved? How would I move through this moment if I were already in my perfect relationship? And she would answer those questions not with words, but with feeling. She would slip on the garment of the loved woman like a second skin, and she would wear it into the afternoon. Within 2 months, she met a man who embodied every quality she had been silently, consistently assuming into her life. They are, today, happily married. Now, let me share with you the most revolutionary truth I know. The one that, in my experience, most profoundly transforms the lives of those who truly receive it. You are already the person you want to be. In the infinite realm of consciousness, in that vast, dimensionless space, where all possibilities coexist simultaneously, every version of you already exists. There is a version of you who is wealthy, a version who is vibrantly healthy, a version who is loved beyond measure, a version who has created meaningful work that has touched thousands of lives. Your task, and this is the great relief at the center of all this, is not to create these versions. They already exist. Your task is simply to assume the feeling of being them, to reach across the apparent gap between where you stand and where you wish to stand, and to close that gap not through effort but through assumption. Think of it this way. Consciousness is like a wardrobe of infinite size, filled with an infinite number of garments. Each garment represents a different state of being. Right now, you are wearing a particular garment, the garment of your current assumption about yourself. If you wish to experience a different state, you do not need to build a new garment from scratch. You need only select a different one. Reach into that wardrobe, find the garment of the person you wish to be, put it on, and then, this is crucial, forget that you're wearing it. Wear it so naturally, so completely, that it simply becomes your skin. The wealthy version of you is not a future achievement. It exists now, in the realm of pure possibility. When you assume the feeling of that wealthy person, not desperately, not with effort, but with the calm certainty of one who is simply recognizing a truth, you literally inhabit that version of yourself. You step into it. And from within it, you begin to see the world differently, to act differently, to attract differently. Let me give you a practical technique, a precise step-by-step method you can begin using tonight. Step 1. Know what you want with specificity. Not, I want to be successful. Success means nothing without a face. Say instead, I want to be a best-selling author. I want to run a thriving business that employs 20 people. I want to live in perfect, radiant health. Name it. Make it real. Step 2. Construct a scene that implies your desire is already fulfilled. Note the word implies. Not a scene of receiving your desire, but a scene that could only be happening if your desire were already real. A friend congratulating you, you reviewing your bank statement with quiet satisfaction, a doctor telling you your results are remarkable. Step 3. Enter that scene in imagination, not as an observer watching a film, but as a participant. See what you would see, hear what you would hear, smell the air of that moment if you can. Make it vivid, make it present. Step 4. Capture the feeling. This is the whole game. How would you feel if this scene were genuinely happening right now? Find that feeling. It might be satisfaction, relief, deep, quiet joy, gratitude, whatever it is, find it and hold it. Step 5. Carry that feeling into your day. Whenever thoughts about your desire arise, don't strategize, don't scheme. Return to the feeling. Live from within it. Step 6. Persist until it is natural. Keep assuming your desired state, not strenuously, not desperately, but consistently, until it stops feeling like an assumption and starts feeling like simply who you are. Let me share a personal example. Years ago, I wanted to speak to larger audiences about these principles. At the time, my gatherings were modest, 20 or 30 people, in small rooms, leaning forward on folding chairs. I was grateful for them, but I knew with a certainty I could not entirely explain that these ideas were meant to reach thousands, and so I assumed it. Not wished for it, not prayed for it in the conventional sense, assumed it. I would close my eyes and feel myself standing before a vast audience. I would feel the particular electricity of a room filled with hundreds of people who had chosen to come to hear something that might change their lives. I would hear the response at the end. I would feel in my chest the deep satisfaction of a man who has found his right and proper work and is doing it at the fullest possible scale. Most importantly, I would inhabit the feeling of being someone for whom this was simply normal, not a miracle, not an achievement, just Tuesday. I persisted in this assumption for months. Then, seemingly from nowhere, though there is no nowhere in this law, only timing we cannot see, invitations began to arrive. radio stations, larger venues, publishers expressing interest in my written work. The world, faithful mirror that it always is, began to reflect back the assumption I had been quietly, consistently holding. I began speaking to audiences of hundreds, then thousands, and here is what I want you to notice. It did not feel like a miracle. It did not feel like a lucky break. It felt natural. Because I had already been living inside that reality and consciousness for months before it appeared in form. But what about doubt? Because doubt will come. I promise you that. It comes for everyone. In the middle of the night, when the room is dark and the world is quiet and the old familiar voice rises up like a tide, who do you think you are? This is fantasy. This is deception. You are building castles on air. What do you do with that? Here is what I want you to understand about doubt, and it will change your relationship to it permanently. Doubt is just another assumption. That's all it is. It is not reality. It is not insight. It is not the wise voice of reason protecting you from foolishness. It is simply an assumption, the assumption of impossibility, wearing the costume of wisdom. And if you can assume limitation, you can assume possibility. If you can assume failure, you can assume success. If you can assume that you are unworthy, you can assume that you are worthy. These are all assumptions. Not one of them is more real than another. The only question that matters is which assumption serves you. I once had a student facing a serious illness. The medical prognosis was poor. The people around him were kind in the particular way that people are kind when they have already begun to grieve. Every external circumstance pointed in one direction. He chose to point his assumption in the other. Every time doubt arose, and it arose often, as it would for any honest human being in his situation, he would pause and say to himself, quietly and without drama, I can assume sickness or I can assume health. I choose health. And he would return to the feeling of being completely well, vital, energetic, moving through his life with the unself-conscious ease of a man who has never had reason to question the cooperation of his body. His doctors called his recovery a miracle. It was not a miracle. It was assumption. Here is something that will fascinate you if you begin paying attention to it. When you change your assumption about yourself, you do not merely change yourself, you change your world. Everyone in it, everything in it. It is like dropping a stone into still water. The ripples do not stop at the point of impact. They spread, they travel, they reach the farthest edges of the pond. People will begin treating you differently without being able to say why. Opportunities will surface in places that were, before, simply blank walls. Circumstances will rearrange themselves not through your manipulation or strategy, but through the deep intelligence of a universe that is always